Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh or anywhere you get your podcast from. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, joined as always by Nick Horwat. And the Penguins, well, they made a couple of trades this week. We'll talk about those trades and what they could mean for the players that were already on the roster, specifically at the center ice position. And then there was a trade rumor that has been circulating around Penguins Twitter, Penguins Facebook, Penguins fandom. As of right now, we'll address that and whether or not we believe what one Pittsburgh radio host had to say. And then we'll take a look back on Kyle Dubas' summer to pick out what his best addition was, just point blank, simplifying things. Who is the best player the Penguins have brought in this summer? Let's get started. And let's start off with the biggest news of the week, really the biggest news of the month so far, if you discount the Sidney Crosby non-news. So let's talk about these two trades, and specifically the trade that brought in a player that we're actually going to see this year. Penguins bring in Cody Glass, a third-round pick and a sixth-round pick from the Nashville Predators in exchange for minor leaguer Jordan Frasca. I gave my thoughts yesterday on Tip of the Ice-Burgh Live, but Horwat, I wanted to hear your thoughts on the acquisition of Cody Glass.
Overall, it's a move you can't complain about. It's acquiring an NHL talent. Wherever you stick him in regards to the NHL is up to you. But it is an NHL talent. It is a warm body to possibly make the lineup, to use in the lineup for a player that, I'll be honest, I forgot was in the system. So net positive there. Nothing against Jordan Frasca or anything he's done with the Penguins recently, but clearly he wasn't making waves. He wasn't popping up on anyone's, top prospects board. He wasn't in any NHL player conversation. So for the Penguins as an organization, gaining a player like Cody Glass is, for that sort of return, is a good move. It is a net positive move that can add depth to the lineup. It may add to a logjam, but so be it. It is a name that's going to be useful. I brought it up last week with the defenseman that sometimes having that logjam can be a good problem if that's the only thing you're worried about. We'll see how it plays out in the season, but for now it looks like Cody Glass will come in, fight for an NHL spot, and we'll see where the lineup goes from there. If I don't know the kind of utility he brings, I don't know if he's just a center or if he can move to wings, but regardless, it's a bigger NHL face than some of the other names that have been floated around the NHL lineup for the Penguins right now.
Yeah, and let's face it, we saw a similar, I'll say, logjam last year in the bottom six, and a lot of those names didn't pan out. I mean, Andreas Janssen didn't step on the ice for the Penguins in the regular season before he went back over to Europe. Vinny Hinostroza early in the season looked half decent, and then, was replaced by a younger player. At the end of the day, you bring in a guy in Cody Glass, 25 years old, a guy that was a former first-round pick, along with a little bit more draft capital for, as you mentioned, a player that I don't think any of us expected to get to the NHL level, certainly not this season. It's a win. It was a cap dump by Nashville. Kyle Dubas weaponizes the available cap space that he had to add pieces, specifically pieces for the future, and a guy in Cody Glass who, with a fresh start, maybe rebounds and finds the game that he was supposed to have when he was taken 6th overall by the Vegas Golden Knights back in 2017. But you mentioned it there, creates a bit of a logjam, right? 7 centers on or around the NHL roster, including Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Lars Eller, Nola Chari, and then the new guys, Kevin Hayes, Blake Lizotte, Cody Glass, and that is without even throwing in guys like Sam Poulin and Vasily Ponomarev. So with this logjam now at the center ice position, do you think the Penguins end up trading away one of those centers before the season begins?
Ooh, I don't know, because I was shocked this trade happened in the first place. Whenever I say shocked, I mean, I'm surprised that the Penguins were still working at this point of the summer. It's cottage season for a lot of NHL GMs, for a lot of NHL teams, reporters, players, all of it. So seeing a deal happen in mid-August sort of caught everyone not by surprise. I mean, the Blues, it also helped that the Blues did their trade and offer sheets and did the whole bit that helped things along. Also kind of let Kyle Dubas realize, I can still do things. All right, let me get this done while I'm here. while I'm in the office today. So if they make another trade, I would assume it happens. I would say still within the month. I don't really know exactly. It depends on how many people are still working. I would say it's possible because it is such a logjam, but also Kyle Dubas and Mike Sullivan are probably going to want to see what they have here. Probably going to want to utilize, at least in a training camp setting, uh, see who they have. They're going to want to see what Cody Glass can bring. They're going to want to see how Lars Eller can stack up against guys like this, how maybe Noel Acciari can stack up, maybe how Sam Poulin can filter into this conversation. Don't forget John Gruden's down there, or you already mentioned Ponamara. They're going to want to see how these guys can play out. And I mean, Mike Sullivan, if nothing else, loves a good roster battle. And there will be, once again, plenty of that for everyone's viewing pleasure at training camp. And yeah, maybe I shouldn't say if a trade happens, it'll happen this month. It probably won't. It'll probably happen during camp.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go with this. One, it depends on the market, which I think we all agree has been pretty slow and is always slow in August, as you mentioned there. But two, I think it happens in camp once other teams see what they have and see whether or not they need to add another center. And if they do, again, the Penguins are in a position where if they can get a decent return, they're going to ship out veterans. And Lars Eller is a name that was on the trade block last year at the trade deadline. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's a name that pops up in those conversations all year long until he inevitably does get traded. Now, whether or not it happens before the season, again, you don't want to sell under the value because there's no need to trade Lars Eller if you're not going to get decent value in return. So that value has to be created. I don't think that's where you're at right now in the offseason. But if, again, you get into training camps, teams say, you know what, we want an upgrade at third line center. Lars Eller was pretty good for the Penguins at third line center last year. If he was in the fourth line center position, he could be one of the best in hockey, I think, based on what we saw last year, still, even at an advanced age. So I see him being a name that a lot of teams might have interest in. And once the market heats up and his value might increase, one or both of Eller and Acciari should be in play before the season and honestly as the season gets underway.
Yeah, that's why the trade deadline is that far into the year. You have plenty of time to sort out who your guys are, who you want going forward, who you don't want going forward, giving you time to negotiate, make deals, and make backup plans and make third plans. There's all kinds of time to go into the season with this massive group of centers and with this kind of depth, and roll along from there. Because if nothing else, the veteran guys will take their roles. They're going to be probably the first ones to be given the NHL lineup spots. And then, if anything, the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins will once again have a strong team to start the year, it appears, given some of the names that'll be there.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of names here that the Penguins need to filter through, and I think a good training camp will certainly solidify who's going where.
Yeah, and when I look at Noel Acciari's contract here, 2 years remaining, $2 million a year. I think that whenever I say before the season, I'm mostly talking about Lars Eller. During the season and trade deadline specifically, that's when I think you could see a guy like Noel Acciari get a little bit more interest because Noel Acciari he's a playoff player, right? He does the dirty work. He does the work that a lot of people don't want to do. Maybe in the playoffs they do a little bit more often, but Noel Acciari from game 1 to game 82 and then onward, he's always blocking shots. He's always playing physical. He's always putting his body on the line. And I think even at $2 million, there's going to be a team that's fighting for a playoff spot or in a playoff spot that's going to want another player like that if they can fit it under the cap space. And honestly, at that point, if the Penguins are out of it, they might retain a little bit on Noel Acciari. Again, you can only retain on 3 players. They're already retaining on 2 for this season. So they have the space and eligibility to retain on him, and especially going into next season because those other 2 fall off the list. But I think Eller is the name more so that I'm keeping an eye on from this day forward and specifically from training camp onward.
Yeah, especially with Eller. Eller's a cheap movable deal. Acciari, if you want to retain on Acciari, he's got that partial no trade clause. But if you find a taker, you can retain up to $1 million. It's only a $2 million deal. So it's a cheap deal to move. It's also one that I'm sure plenty of teams would just be happy to take. It's especially if it's at the deadline where he only has 1 year left. Okay, what's $2 million for a usable fourth liner that can fill holes and can fill roles.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely would take that at full face value. So, the retaining part of it, not super important, but even whenever it is that low of a number, it's not noticeable, especially with, like you mentioned, those guys coming off the books soon. And also after this season, they're done retaining on Petrie and Riley Smith. So the gates open up a little more to build in the next season.
Let's move over and talk about a couple of rumors that have been flying around because of Pittsburgh radio host for 105.9 The X. That is, of course, Mark Madden, who's made some waves recently. He made some comments on the Breakfast with Ben's podcast for Trib Live saying that Kris Letang pushed for a trade to Montreal. He didn't give a time frame of when this happened, but considering the fact that Letang was set to be a free agent 2 years ago, and he decided to come back to Pittsburgh when he did have the opportunity to go to Montreal, we'd have to imagine it's been sometime in the last 2 years. This was when he was asked about the Crosby situation and the non-contract and the non-news surrounding Sidney Crosby, and specifically why he reunited the Big Three 2 years ago if he was unsure about his future with the Penguins organization. Mark had two things to say. Here's the first one. Quote, "I've been told Gino, Evgeny Malkin, won't be back after this year, that he'll go to Russia and forego the last year of his deal." Now, the reason that we're not going to talk about this much is because before he said that, and then after he said that, Evgeny Malkin himself kind of shot these things down. Malkin told Russian media outlet TASS.ru, quote, "I still have 2 years left on my contract with Pittsburgh. I need to play these 2 years and see how it goes." And then a day after, Mark Madden mentioned this on that podcast, Breakfast with Ben's. Rob Rossi of The Athletic shoots it down, quoting Evgeny Malkin directly, saying, quote, "Not true." So the Malkin part of this was immediately shelled and thrown down and discarded because Evgeny Malkin himself on two different occasions shot it down. The other thing that Madden had to say when talking about the Crosby situation was, quote, "I heard there were discussions about trying to get Kris Letang to Montreal at Letang's request, but nothing came of it." There has been nobody that has disputed that to this point, but I wanted to get your thoughts, Horwat, when you hear those rumors from Mark Madden of 105.9 The X.
They seem a bit out of left field because of that lengthy deal that Letang just signed. He loves playing here. He's going to want to finish his career here, but we'll see how things go after that 2-year, schedule that Rob Rossi laid out a couple weeks ago. I could see maybe Madden being given misinterpreted information because I believe me and you were told something a little while back that Letang had essentially, whenever he was dealing with his contract negotiations with Hextall, had essentially started looking around at other teams and was really focusing on Montreal. So I could see that maybe just sort of misinterpreted information that he maybe was given 2 years too late or something along those lines, that maybe Letang and his family were pretty committed to Montreal then, but definitely not now since a 6-year deal has been signed. But that's the only thing that comes to my head. Other than that, it sounds like a lot of hogwash and kind of nothing to worry about. I mean, everyone on the internet has their opinions of Mark Madden already anyway. People know him in person, know who he is. People who know him on the internet know other things. Everyone's going to have their own opinion on what he says, and who knows exactly, and we're not going to know exactly what Mark was told or what that person, whatever his source was telling him. We're not going to know all that. We shouldn't, but on the surface, it just seems a bit ridiculous. Get back to this conversation in a year or two, maybe, because maybe by then there is that sort of tension that rises that, everyone's sort of leaving at that point. The team isn't good anymore. I think as of right now in the year 2024, no, I highly doubt there's any sort of trade request coming from Kris Letang. And like I said, if anything, maybe 2 years ago, misinterpreted information.
Yeah, I have to believe somebody trustworthy told him this for him to say it flippantly on a show like this, right? I mean, Mark Madden is not a dumb person, right? We everybody, like you mentioned, has their opinions of him, but he has been around this team and covering this team for a lot longer than most people in Pittsburgh. He's not going to throw out that type of information about that level of player without having some information that he believes will back it up. But at the same time, I agree with you. It just doesn't seem likely to me. Letang had the chance, as I mentioned 2 seasons ago, to go to Montreal if he wanted to. And I understand things have changed drastically between then and now with the team. They are now with a new front office. They are now in a new kind of era as we all see them start to pivot towards the future. But why would he sign a 6-year deal if he was going to, turn tail and leave if it didn't go well in the first 2 years? Now, I understand there might be personal reasons that could change things. We don't know Letang personally, but it feels like if he was having any reservations about being a Penguin for life, he wouldn't have signed, as you mentioned, a 6-year deal that has that full no movement clause through the first 4 years. It becomes a 10-team no trade list or a 10-team approved trade list, I do believe, according to Puckpedia, in the final 2 years, which coincidentally lines up with the 2 years after Evgeny Malkin's 4-year contract is up. So it just feels to me like, again, the timing is interesting because it's right now when all the Crosby news is starting to come up. It just feels to me that it's not something that actually would have happened. And I understand last year was a tough year for Letang. Dealt with several injuries despite playing all 82 games, was kind of demoted a little bit by the organization standards because they brought in another guy in Erik Karlsson that we're all seeing as the power play quarterback, the number one guy. But at the same time, there was no indication that Letang was unhappy through that entire process. I just don't understand why he would, at this point, decide to do that. So again, when everybody asks about this, it was in the live chat yesterday a lot of times. So I figured let's address it. I just personally don't think it was anything substantive at this point. I understand that Madden probably had a source that said it and he probably trusts this source, but I don't think it's anything that actually is going to materialize this year at the very least, and probably not next year either.
Yeah, everyone has their trusted sources, and that's why you're in the business. A couple things you said there, I want to put other notes on. I mean, you mentioned that he had a tough year last year. What about the year before?
Well,
the second stroke of his NHL career, losing his father, other injuries then. I mean, the way you said that things can change, day after day, year after year. I mean, that was the first year after he signed his deal and all that happened. Like, he spent a lot of time, in Montreal that year, dealing with, like I said, his injuries and the loss of his father. It wasn't an easy year for him then. I mean, that's why he came out with the Masterton Trophy. Maybe there was some sort of element added of, he liked being home, for all that time with his, with more of his family and his loved ones. But it's unfortunate that maybe something like that grew in his head months after he signed that deal. But in the same vein, it just doesn't seem likely because he has 18 years of Pittsburgh experience now. And we're not doubting that maybe he finished his career in Montreal. We're not. I think we've already kind of said multiple times before that that's a likely outcome.
There are many connections.
Yeah. It's just not going to happen in the year 2024. Probably not in 25. Get back to us whenever Malkin leaves. That's whenever I would assume things happen. I would say for now, it's nothing to worry about. I could see maybe that, affinity growing in Letang a little bit. Yeah. Maybe like he's starting to look forward to it because he's got so many years left on his deal. It's not like he has a 2-year deal. No, he's got 4 years left. So you're going to start looking ahead to that. And he does practice. I mean, there was that picture that floated, I think it was last year, of him practicing with some of the Canadiens in Montreal wearing Penguin stuff, wearing a red jersey. Yeah. So there's going to be that sort of, looking ahead and maybe he's watching the Canadiens closely. You never know. I mean, maybe he's trying to see what sort of moves they're going to do in the next couple. Again, I'm just sort of spitballing myself now too.
Yeah.
But Maybe something's growing in Letang. I doubt any sort of trade request happened, though. I think that specific part is a bit faulty.
Yeah, I don't know if he pulled a full Denny Lemieux and said, trade me right effing now. Okay. But I think when you look at the situation, there's obvious affinity for the Montreal Canadiens. There's obviously connections with his former agent being the new general manager in Montreal. There's a young team up there that could probably use, a guy like Kris Letang as their kind of defensive leader with guys like Caden Gooley up there, Logan Mailloux. They're obviously having high expectations for on the defensive side of things as well. And Lane Hudson, I believe, as well up there. So they have plenty of young defensemen that could probably use that, workhorse type of player that has been there, done that for 2 decades now, to be able to show them the way how to, be a standout defenseman in this league for many, many years. So it makes sense from that aspect, but I think the timing of this just doesn't make much sense to me, which is why, especially having it be back-to-back with the Malkin thing that was immediately shot down, it takes a lot of the steam out of it. But let's go into hypothetical land here for a second, because it's August 15th, and honestly, that's where we live for the most part in August. Hypothetically, if Evgeny Malkin and Kris Letang decided that they do indeed want out, Malkin wants to go to Russia, play with, Magnitogorsk in the KHL, and Kris Letang decides, hey, I want to go up and play in Montreal. Would you begrudge them for those decisions of wanting out from Pittsburgh?
I think on the surface, maybe a bit, because they did sign those deals. They did commit to Pittsburgh, and at least in the Malkin situation, the Penguins are on the hook for the money still. You could probably figure something out with Letang and at least get that cap hit off the books. But at the end of the day, also, we know how competitive athletes are, not just hockey players, not just Penguins, but athletes in general. If they want to go win, if Malkin figures, I've won my 3 cups, I don't see myself landing on another team in the NHL that might be willing to take me in as a cup competitor. Time to go win I think it's the Gregorian Cup in the KHL. Oh, go for it, by all means. Because you want to be that, because you want to fill those competitive juices. You just mentioned the defensive names in the Canadiens. The forward core there is also nuts. That team is going to be so fun to watch pretty quickly, I think, the Canadiens. If Letang sees that team starting to pop off and is like, I want to win again, you can't begrudge guys for wanting to win. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the long and the short of it. But at the same time, as someone who covers this team, you committed those many years. You did, especially when you lock in on those contract clauses. I couldn't think of the word. When you lock in on those clauses. Now it is the team that does also sign those, so they bear some of that weight. But they're committed to it. They probably requested it. Mm-hmm. I think I could see going both ways. I know I just kind of towed the line. I didn't give you a real answer, but I think yes and no. You can see them wanting to be competitive. You can see them wanting to win, and the Penguins might not be winning anymore. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, they committed to the Penguins, and they do believe that Pittsburgh can win. So there is that to it, too.
Yeah, there's that to it. There's the Crosby of it all, which is a large part of why they came back in the first place. I don't begrudge them at all. Honestly, they've given everything they had to the Penguins. They gave, 17 straight playoff runs, 3 Stanley Cup championships, 1 Stanley Cup run in 2008. I'm trying to think if Letang was part of that one as well. But again, back of my head. And then, of course, an Eastern Conference final run in 2013 as well. The one thing I will say is Montreal's not competing for anything anytime soon. They got a lot of young talent up there. They're not competing for anything anytime soon. They're in a similar position to the Penguins, except the Penguins are going down. The Canadiens are going up. They're kind of meeting in the middle right now, and that's not as a contender. And then I was curious as to where, Magnitogorsk finished last season, first seed in the Eastern Conference of the KHL. So maybe there's a little bit more merit to wanting to win there, but also, again, I think there's more that goes into this than wanting to win. These guys have won a lot in their NHL careers and in their just hockey careers in general. But if they decide they want out, then they want out. I think the biggest thing that you mentioned there is you got to go out on good terms. And if you help the Penguins in any way, shape, or form, they'll appreciate it. But at the end of the day, I think people will get over it because of what they were able to do during their careers in Pittsburgh. Like you mentioned, Letang, he goes. He's probably taken his cap hit with him. He's taken his whole contract with him. Evgeny Malkin, if he decides to go, it's a tougher pill to swallow. But again, what did Evgeny Malkin say when asked about it? Quote, not true. So I don't think that's something we're going to have to worry about, not to mention the fact that I think even at the age of, what'll he be at that point, 40, 41 years old, he'll be able to go play a season or two in the KHL. And I don't think anybody over there is going to be like, I think he's washed. I don't think we're going to bring him in, especially over in Europe, where we see in Czechia, 52-year-old Jaromir Jagr, he's still out there pedaling around. And Evgeny Malkin at 41 is still going to be a pretty big and pretty solid player for any league, let alone the KHL.
There's been a lot of KHL push this summer, it feels like, too. I mean, we saw Evgeny Kuznetsov went over there. Maybe Tony DeAngelo's going over there. We don't know yet.
Yeah.
Then there was obviously the big NHL versus KHL game, which seemed kind of entertaining.
Yeah.
And then with Ovechkin being over there and Malkin being over, a lot of questions being asked to those guys. And Ovechkin might want to commit to Moscow for some time when he's done with his NHL career. There's a lot of
don't forget Radulov is over there, and Malkin and Radulov are very close.
Radulov's over there. Kovalchuk's still there kicking around. I think Datsuk, I don't know if he's still playing, but I know he's still involved in the KHL over there somewhere.
Yeah.
It's a nuts league over there. You can play until you're 50 over there too. So
yeah.
There's been a lot of KHL noise in the NHL this summer, and it's still some of the best talents in the world over there. So it's not like it's a soft league by any stretch. And if 40-year-old Ovechkin or 40-year-old Malkin, or when the time comes, 40-year-old Kucherov, Sorokin, Shesterkin, all of them, they're all going to eventually, I would assume, play at least a year there to finish off their careers, because I think a lot of them started there. And the way a lot of Russians show a lot of pride for their country, they're going to want to go back at some point. And we're starting to see it with Malkin and Ovechkin because they're nearing that time.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's finish this episode off by just simplifying things, right? We talk a lot about all of Kyle Dubas's moves. We've dug into each of them contract wise, fit wise, situation wise, but let's simplify it to close out this show. Who's the best player the Penguins have brought in this summer? Just point blank right now. Don't look into the future. Yeah, I like Tanner Howe too, but right now he's not the best player. I think there are other players that they brought in that are probably at the moment a little bit of a higher level than Tanner Howe. Future-wise, maybe he is the best player, but who is the best player right now? Because the Penguins, I mean, they didn't bring in any massive names. They didn't really bring in any top of the lineup names. So who do you think is the best player they brought in this summer?
And sheer based on best, Blake Lizotte has a high ceiling. Anthony Beauvillier has some work to do. Based on just who's the best, Kevin Hayes. I think the numbers at one point in his career spoke for themselves. He's got the pedigree. He's got a namesake. And, just in the simplest of terms of just who's the best player that the Penguins brought in, because they didn't do too much. Everyone's down on Grzelcyk right now. Sebastian Aho just kind of depends and see what happens. Everyone else is probably going to float in the minors for a little bit, or float as healthy scratches until training camp is through. At the moment, we know Kevin Hayes is coming in as at most third line center, maybe moved to a wing, maybe bumped around. It's got to be him. And then, of course, looking ahead, Blake Lizotte enters the conversation.
Yeah, I was between those two as well. I mean, you look at Kevin Hayes, I would say he has potential to put up 40-plus points this season. I can't say that about really any of the other forwards that were brought in. I think if you're looking at overall game, especially because there is a chance that Kevin Hayes continues in the trajectory that he started a couple seasons ago, and specifically advanced last season in St. Louis, I'm going to go with Blake Lizotte because he's somebody who I think the arrow is pointing up on. He's somebody who I think Penguins fans are really going to enjoy watching. And he's somebody who I think comes in with a roster spot to lose, right? It'll be his spot to lose. And I think he comes in and has an opportunity to really climb the lineup a little bit. Similar to what we saw from Drew O'Connor last year. O'Connor had a higher starting position because he was considered a third line center third line winger, alongside Lars Eller. And then he climbed his way up to being a top line guy for a good portion of the season last year. I think Lizotte has a similar opportunity coming in as a fourth line guy who can climb his way up the lineup if he performs. I think he has the talent level, and I think that it's close between Hayes and Lizotte, but I'll take Lizotte of the two, with one guy's arrow pointing down, but still being able to potentially come out and kind of refine his game a little bit and kind of revitalize his career a little bit in the waning years, versus a guy in Lizotte who's really looking to take off. And I'm expecting good things from Lizotte, so I'll go with Lizotte in this one.
Yeah, it was pretty much one of those two. I don't think you can make too good of arguments for the rest of them. We just don't know what Cody Glass is really either. Maybe he could have entered the conversation, but I think I didn't really look too far into the numbers.
The pedigree is there, right?
Yeah.
The pedigree is there because he was at one point considered a prospect that could turn into a top 6 center in the NHL. He's not quite there anymore, especially after scoring 6 goals last season for Nashville, 3 of them coming in one game when he scored a hat trick against Colorado. Again, Glass is one of the most intriguing names going into camp for me, especially knowing how busy it is at the center ice position and not knowing really how comfortable he is with position versatility. I think there's still a chance that, Mike Sullivan, he's going to say, listen, I know you haven't done it before, but welcome to Pittsburgh. Get on the wing, kid. That might happen. There's always that chance. So I'm very intrigued to see what Cody Glass does in camp. That's one of the names that I'm going to be keeping my eye out for, especially early when, what do we have to see from guys like Rust and Crosby and Malkin? We know what they are. They're not going to need to go 100%, even though Crosby always does. Cody Glass is a guy that might be fighting for a roster spot. Who knows? He could find himself really at the AHL level as their top line center to start the season with Kirk McDonald. So he's an interesting name, but I think, back to the point of this entire segment, I'm going Blake Lizotte, you're going Kevin Hayes, and I could make an argument for Beauvillier. I think that if he bounces back right away, he puts himself into that conversation. But I think as of right now, where we stand on August 15th, it's between those two, like we mentioned.
Yeah, and like I said, everyone else is essentially putting around in the minors to start, putting around as healthy scratches. Mm-hmm. There's not too much to dive into with some of the other names. And people are just down on Grizzly too, because maybe you wanted to make that argument, but people haven't thought too highly of him yet. So he just is going to need to prove himself. I like the Sebastian Aho signing. It's just, who knows if he even starts in the lineup or is a healthy scratch, because it seems like he'll be fighting for a roster spot with Jack St. Ivany. Maybe John Ludwig also squeezes his name in there. There's going to be battles there as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, either way, it's going to be last year we talked to Josh Getzov right before training camp. He actually just finished media day at UPMC Lemieux Complex, and he said last season that there was the most competition that he has seen in Pittsburgh in a very long time in training camp. It's probably going to be more so this year. It's just going to elevate more and more and more, and that's because the Penguins, they have more question marks. So we'll see if some of those questions get answered in a little over a month, so we have some time here. But obviously, nice to have some news, nice to bring in and welcome a fresh face in Cody Glass, especially a name that has a lot of pedigree behind him as well. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. And remember, you can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh, where make sure to like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Or you can find us anywhere you get your podcasts from. We'll see you guys next time.